please feel free to participate. Use the chat box if you want to do that to participate in some of the things that Jessica and I will be going over. If you wanted to unmute that, we're okay with that too. We want to hear your voice, or at least read your thoughts and read the different things that that you all have to say. So if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to share them in the chat box. If there's anything that you feel unsure about asking in front of your peers, you can direct message Jessica and I to ask an anonymous question if you wanted to do that too. I do want to just let you know that we are talking about really sensitive topics tonight. And according to statistics, it's likely that there is a survivor here in this Zoom room. So let's all be respectful of that as well. This first slide shows our 24/7, 365-day or confidential support line. At YWCA, we are committed to eliminating racism and empowering women. We do that in a few ways. We have this great support line that you or anybody else can call if you need some help, if you need some guidance, if you need some advice about sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, anything like that. If you are a survivor or aren't sure if you could be in a situation of abuse, you can go ahead and give our advocates a call and we can provide that free crisis counseling and therapy. We're here for you, for De Anza students and for Santa Clara County residents. Again, this is our support line 24/7. It's 1-800-572-2782. Crisis support and education and outreach are just a couple of things that we do on our end. I can talk more later on about some of the other great things that we also do at our agency. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica now.
Alrighty, so after this presentation, you will be able to identify key facts and realities about sexual violence, understand what is and isn't consent, understand the myths and facts around consent, and know how to help a friend and what not to do. Okay, so what is sexual assault? Sexual assault is an umbrella term. It means any sexual activity that is non-consensual. This can range from rape, which is sexual intercourse without consent, to non-consensual oral sex, to foreign object or digital penetration, so any penetration of sexual orifices. So if it's not consensual and if it's a sexual activity, it is sexual assault. So what is consent? Consent is willful, active, and enthusiastic yes. So in order to be able to consent, you have to be over 18 years old, you have to be sober, so not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and you have to have the mental capacity to say yes. Now, this is often confused with coercion. Coercion is a situation when it's harder to say no than it is to say yes. So let's do an example of this. Hey, Vanessa, can I borrow your pen?
No.
Oh, come on, I really need your pen. Can I borrow your pen?
No, I don't think so, Jessica. No.
It's really important. Can I borrow your pen?
No, Jessica. No, I'm not good with that.
Come on, Vanessa, just give me your pen.
Okay.
So, in that situation, the environment that I was creating, it was harder for Vanessa to say, no, I can't you can't borrow my pen than it was for her to say yes. So I really put her in a situation where it was almost impossible for her to say no. And so that's coercion. And if someone says yes while being coerced, that's not consent.
So if we were meeting in person tonight, Jessica and I would hand you this really great handout. And this kind of just talks about what consent is. So like Jessica said, consent is clear, coherent, willing, and ongoing. So when we're talking about how consent is clear, it's an active and enthusiastic yes. It's not a sure, I guess, or yeah, maybe. It's a definite yes. It's it's an enthusiastic yes. It's not just a kind of, I guess, it's a hell yes, absolutely yes. So it's enthusiastic, and that can be expressed through words or actions that create mutual and understandable permission. And when we say it's coherent, we're saying that people that are incapacitated by drugs or alcohol can't consent, because people that are under the influence aren't able to make those rational, reasonable decisions about giving consent because they lack the capacity to fully understand, what it is, who it's with, when it is, where it is, why, how, all of those things. When we're saying willing, we're saying that consent must be free from pressure and coercion. So much like the pen example that Jessica and I just demonstrated for you. It's not Jessica asking and asking and asking until I say yes. It's me saying absolutely yes from the get. It's consent. Consent can't be obtained through psychological or emotional manipulation. That is not how it works, and that's absolutely not consent. Same goes for any kind of threats of like physical violence or any kinds of threats. Like I think Jessica mentioned this about like maybe being coerced into or threatened with possibly being outed or anything like that. That is absolutely not consent. Ongoing is consent that has to be granted every time. So that can mean that maybe I'm going to say absolutely yes, Jessica, you can borrow my pen right now. Yes, hell yes, you can borrow my pen now. But in 10 minutes, I might say, Jessica, I need that pen back. It's not okay with me anymore. And that's okay. I'm allowed to change my mind and I need to be clear about that. And you need to respect that I'm not cool with that anymore. So I can say, yes, Jessica, today, and I can say, absolutely not, Jessica, tomorrow. I'm able to give consent and take it back. It's something that has to be granted every time, and consent must be obtained at each step of physical intimacy. So this example here says, if someone gives consent to one sexual activity, they have the right to say no to that act or any other act at any other time. Consent can be withdrawn at any step of physical intimacy, including during intimacy too.
Okay, so we kind of went over this a little bit in the last slide, but we're just going to reiterate it real quick. So what isn't consent? Consent is not a one-time thing. So sexual activity one day doesn't mean agreeing to it the next day. So back to the pen example, just because Vanessa gave me her pen yesterday doesn't mean she wants to give it to me today. And also, yes to one type of sexual activity doesn't mean agreeing to something else. So if Vanessa says, yes, you can borrow my pen, that doesn't mean I can take her laptop. Consent is also not binding. It's not a legal contract. And it can be withdrawn at any time, including during. So if Vanessa gave me her pen, but then immediately said, oh, wait, nope, never mind, she can take it right back immediately. She can wait 10 minutes and take it back, doesn't matter. And then the absence of no does not mean that someone consents. So this is what we call affirmative consent, which is a clear understanding between both parties that something is okay. And then the last thing is we're going to go a little bit more into coercion, where it's more difficult to say no than it is to say yes. Now, coercion doesn't have to be physical. It can be related to domestic or intimate partner violence. And some examples of ways coercion happens is fear of safety. If you think that you are going to be in physical danger, if you don't say yes, then you don't really have the power to say no. If you are being threatened by someone saying, like, if you don't do this, I'll out you to your family, that's also not consent. If someone is intimidating you, like punching a wall, verbally abusing you, or there have been previous threats or abuse, then that means that you're unable to consent. Cornering. So if you're physically put into a corner or someone is blocking you from leaving an area or blocking you from having agency over your own body, then that's also not consent. Bribes. If someone has to bribe you into doing a sexual act, then that's not consent. And if there's a power and control dynamic, the example here is if you have a correctional officer, like in a prison, and an inmate in that prison then because of the power dynamic between the correctional officer and the inmate cannot consent, because if they don't if the inmate were to say no, they might be put in danger or might have some privileges revoked or might be put in solitary confinement by that correctional officer.
So this next slide is a video, actually. This is called our consent T video, or the consent T video. It's popular, it's shared, and now we're going to share it here with you. Jessica, can you give me a thumbs up just to let me know that you can hear it when I start playing it?
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Me and Jess.
Okay, so the most important thing with consent is 3 factors: asking, recognizing, and communicating.
So these are some ways that you can ask for consent. This isn't like the definitive list. You can come up with your own creative ways to ask for consent. These are just examples. Like, do you want to do this? You still want to do this? Is this okay? Do you need a break? Are you having fun? What do you want to do next? And then also recognizing that consent can be sexy. You can say things like, do you like it when I do this? I really like that. Is it all right if I take off your pants? Can I touch you there? Do that again. And then does anyone have any other examples of asking for consent that you want to maybe share in the chat? Jessica, you might have to look because I don't think I can see the chat right now.
Okay, no responses yet. Everyone's a little bit shy.
That's just okay. it can definitely be awkward. It's a good segue into that. Consent can definitely be awkward, but it's important to know that that few seconds of awkwardness is better than assuming without asking. So always ask for consent, because it's better to be awkward than cross a boundary. And if you think of some ways to ask later on, feel free to flood our chat with ways to ask for consent.
So here are some ways you can recognize consent. Consent can be nonverbal and communicated through body language. So if someone is engaged or not engaged, that can be an indication of consent. So if they're hesitating, freezing, or there's no movement, then that might be an indication that they're non-consenting or that they don't want to be doing something. Also, verbal consent, which is the most obvious. Saying things like, I really like it when you do that, I'm super into that, or keep going. These are all ways that you can verbally consent. And then make sure to look at all the signs. If someone's saying, I'm really into that, but like they're freezing up, they're hesitating, they're not moving, their body language doesn't seem to be saying that they're into something, then maybe then that could be an indication that they're not super into it. So if you're not sure, if one of the signs is there but another one's not, maybe just stop, step back, and verbally check in with the partner or partners to make sure that everything going on is okay and that your partner feels safe and comfortable.
Okay, and this next piece is just about ways that you can communicate consent. So it's really important to understand that consent does happen before, during, and after. So when we're thinking about consent before, it's talking about with your partner or partners, what are your boundaries? What do you know that you don't like? What do you not want to try? And then during, as Jessica kind of mentioned already, is that kind of verbal consent and the body language, making sure that those two things match. And then even using something like a safe word. After, you can talk with your partners about, what did you like? What did you prefer? Did you find something new that you liked? And is there something that you maybe want to try next time?
And finally, let's talk about affirmative consent. So affirmative consent is a mutual shared agreement that where both parties know that something is okay, right? So it's yes means yes versus no means no. So consent is now affirmative, conscious, and voluntary. If there is a lack of protest or a lack of resistance, a lack of refusal or silence, that does not mean that a person consents, and it does not qualify as affirmative consent. This highlights the importance of communication and understanding before, during, and after sexual activity. New York and California require public colleges to develop affirmative consent policies, and California is the first state to require consent in high school health education class. Talking about consent and affirmative consent can also break down the taboo around sex. If we're comfortable talking about sex, then it empowers survivors and sexually active people everywhere to be able to talk about sex and the taboos and all of the nuances. But when consent doesn't happen, that is sexual assault, which Vanessa will talk about now.
So these are just some quick statistics about sexual assault that are really important to note. So in the United States alone, 1 out of every 5 women is a survivor of sexual assault, whereas 1 out of every 71 men are sexually assaulted. 1 in 8 out of 10 cases of rape, the victim or survivor knew the person who sexually assaulted them. Unfortunately, that is something that, we see a lot of, even working for a rape crisis center like YWCA. We do see and hear that most of the time a rape or an occurrence of sexual assault, it it is typically somebody that the victim knows. Relating to college campus sexual violence, it does occur 1 out of every 5 women and 1 out of 6 men, out of every 6 men. Some more facts. Survivors of sexual assault are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide, 6 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, 13 times more likely to abuse alcohol, and 26 times more likely to abuse drugs.
All right, so let's break down some myths surrounding consent. So we hear a lot about rape and sexual assault in the media. And through that, we all have a perception in our head of who is a victim and who is a perpetrator. So what does rape look like in Hollywood movies? What do we see most often? Who is our perpetrator and who typically is our victim? So if you all want to contribute in the chat box, think about in movies and the media, who is a victim of sexual assault and who is the perpetrator.
And if anyone feels brave to unmute and just kind of shout anything out, you are welcome to do that too. What does the perfect Hollywood perpetrator look like? And what does the perfect Hollywood victim look like? What is the media and what is society telling us? What do they look like? Are they usually someone that identifies as a woman or someone that identifies as a man? I'm thinking specifically about maybe like true crime or like Law and Order, like Special Victims Unit episode. I think that those are kind of some great examples of like how sexual violence is portrayed in like pop culture.
So we haven't gotten any responses yet, which is totally fine. If you think of ideas as we continue with the presentation, please do shout them out in the chat box. But typically, when we think about a victim in media or in popular culture, we typically think of someone who is female or female identifying, someone who is young, maybe in their 20s, walking home alone at nighttime, in an alley or a van, bushes, a park, or a party at a dorm, frat house, that kind of thing. We also think, and we're given the perception through the media, that they maybe should have known better or that they were doing something to ask for it. The way they're dressed could be wearing a skirt or a dress, a tube top or heels. They could maybe be dolled up or wearing a lot of makeup. They're typically petite or small, white, and maybe distracted, not completely paying attention to their surroundings. And when we think of a perpetrator, as told to us by the media, it's typically someone who's male, maybe someone who's older in their 30s or 50s. Maybe they have a weapon, a gun or a knife. They could be stalking someone, or they could look creepy. They could be aggressive. They could want sex or be lonely or can't help themselves or just be horny. They could be wearing a hoodie or a trench coat. They could have a mental disorder. They could be on drugs. And they're typically portrayed as being big or taller, at least taller than the victim. And in some of the most harmful stereotypes, they could maybe be a person of color. So the reality of sexual assault looks much, much different than the way that, than the portrayal that Hollywood and the media give us. In reality, survivors are typically, 90% of survivors are female, but 10% are male. And in the media, we very rarely see a survivor portrayed as male, though 1 in 10 survivors is male. Survivors are, or people who are LGBTQ are also at a higher risk of being victims of sexual assault. Any person of any age can be a survivor of sexual assault, and they can be wearing anything. The number one place that people are sexually assaulted is in the home, and the number two place that people are sexually assaulted is in their car. As far as the perpetrator, we know from statistics that 8% of perpetrators are male, but 2% of perpetrators are female. And in the media, we very, very rarely see a perpetrator who is female, though we know that it happens. And a perpetrator can look like anyone. They don't have to be like some creepy, sleazy looking person. It can be someone who's very well dressed or maybe looks higher income. And 85% of survivors know the person who's perpetrating. It can be a friend, partner, acquaintance, family member, someone in your classes, that kind of thing. And a perpetrator is exerting power and control. The number one weapon they use is not a gun or a knife, it's trust. When you are in the same physical space as someone, when you have a personal relationship with someone, they trust you, and that can be weaponized against them in order to perpetrate sexual assault. And finally, sex is used for violence. Sex is not about power. Sex is about love or lust, but rape is about power. Sexual assault is about exerting power over someone else. It's not coming from a place of caring.
So this is just a little bit about how that myth is harmful. When we think about these stereotypes that are perpetuated, like Jessica said, in the media or in society, or, even among like our own families or friends or our own like social circles, they really are very harmful because they create a false sense of security, do not hold the perpetrator accountable, really limits views on what prevention is and what it looks like. It really could make a survivor feel invisible because, as Jessica noted, when we think about like that Hollywood stereotype, usually it's like maybe like a small, skinny, able-bodied, white person that identifies as a female, right? And when we think about that, it really eliminates other experiences and survivors of all different body types and abilities and genders, and could really create this it has created this culture where we, are really making survivors feel invisible if they don't really fit that mold. It also creates space for victim blaming and really, really impacts reporting. I mean, the statistics that we shared with you, sometimes I think about how if there were more reports, we could have clear statistics, right? It's really hard to gather these kind of statistics because of the fact that this is a highly unreportable thing. And why is it highly unreportable? It's because there's this fear of not being believed. I mean, that's one of many reasons, but just that fear of not being believed and possibly losing everyone, losing your friends, losing your family, losing your job, losing your education, your money, things like that. And then, these harmful myths cause survivors to internalize those myths.
So a thing that comes up a lot when we talk about sexual assault and reporting is false reporting. In a recent survey that was done in 2018, a large group of college students were asked the same question. They were asked what percentage of sexual assaults they thought were falsely reported. And their response was, a lot of them said around 40% of reported sexual assaults were falsely reported. The FBI has come out with major studies saying that false reporting rates in regards to sexual assault are between 2 and 8%, as opposed to the 40 that a lot of people perceive. but the majority of research actually believes that the rate is between 2 and 5%, which is similar to the rate for all other violent crimes. So why do we think that people are false reporting when they're not? We think that because of the myth that we talked about earlier. We have a very specific idea about what victims and perpetrators of sexual assault look like. And if someone is outside of that narrow little circle, then it makes it harder for them to be believed. And also, this because of the similar rate for all other violent crimes, it really puts into perspective the ways in which our society really downplays sexual assault. If someone told you that their house had been robbed or that they'd been mugged on the street, most people are going to believe them. Most police officers are going to believe them. But it's an entirely different landscape when someone says that they were raped or sexually assaulted. The first reaction that some people have is disbelief, shock, not or failing to immediately and enthusiastically believe the survivor. And that's why it's so important to believe survivors. We know that almost all of reports are true. It's just the societal conceptions that make it difficult for survivors to be believed.
Yeah, and there's almost this feeling where it's like we hear so many times that survivors feel like they can't disclose or report or talk to family and friends about it unless they have like hard evidence to prove that they were assaulted, because there's just that fear of not being believed. So these are some of the trauma responses that I'm going to go over today. Again, just like with so many things that have to do with sexual assault, this isn't some definitive list of every trauma response that could occur when a sexual assault happens. So you may have heard of fight versus flight, but there's also freeze. So that sounds exactly like what it is. So, I mean, if there was a sexual assault that occurred, a survivor of that could very well fight. And this is their body's natural reaction, right? This is their trauma response. This is something that is really out of their control and something that just happens when their body and mind is put through this kind of emotional and physical stress. So that fighting looks like maybe pushing, grabbing, punching, kicking, hitting, whatever, to get out of what's going on. That flight means, running away, rolling over, like pushing through doors, like just trying anything you can to get out of the situation. And then freeze is just your body's, it can be your body's reaction of literally just like freezing up and being unable to move. All of these are normal responses and to a very abnormal act, right? So there's this piece here about what a trauma response is. And a trauma response is a normal response to an abnormal amount of stress. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. This isn't something that occurs. No one knows how they're going to, what their own trauma responses are going to be unless, it actually occurs to, to the individual. You can't just assume that you'd be the fighter or whatever. All of these are, again, normal responses to an abnormal amount of physical, emotional, and mental stress. Talking about or thinking about like other responses, some of those can include anxiety, anger, avoidance, betrayal, denial, disbelief, depression, emotional shock, fear, guilt, lack of trust, powerlessness, shame, embarrassment, feeling withdrawn. These are all actually really similar to the same kind of responses that we see in domestic violence situations as well. So it's important to note that every individual is going to respond uniquely to a sexual assault, and that there is no proper way to react. everyone is different. Every experience is different. So that means that every response is going to be different. And the feelings of this kind of crisis phase can be triggered at any time by certain sights or smells, sounds, situations, or memories. So that's kind of what we mean when we're talking about triggers. Just that, you know, when a survivor is triggered, they could very well go back to that fight, flight, or freeze response. The triggers really activate the nervous system in ways that make the survivor feel like their body or their mind is reliving that experience. Like I said, through things like smell or sound or a situation or a song or something like that. You're on mute.
All right, so this brings up the question, how can I help a friend? So if a friend discloses to you that they have been sexually assaulted or they were in a very dangerous situation, there are some things that you can do and some things that you should avoid doing. The first is to actively listen. You know, it is their story, they're telling it, they are trusting you to hear it and respond in a good way. So it's really, really important to listen to what they're saying. It's also really important to believe them and acknowledge and validate their feelings. Like Vanessa said earlier, there is no proper way to respond to sexual assault, and everyone responds differently. So it's important to let them know that the way they're responding is okay, that they're allowed to have feelings and they're allowed to have these sorts of responses. It's also important, or you can also help them look for resources and outside services. Creating an emotional or a physical or emotional safety plan, helping them file a restraining order, maybe even helping them call the YWCA crisis support line or helping them make an appointment with a therapist or that kind of thing. But it's also important to allow them to make their own decision. Everyone responds differently to sexual assault, and it's really, really, really important that the survivor have all of the agency in the situation, so they're allowed to make their own decisions. On average, it takes someone 7 times to leave an abusive relationship. So this really illustrates how difficult these sorts of situations can be. What you should avoid is acting shocked. As we talked about with our media example, anyone can be a victim of sexual assault. So it's important to not act shocked that it was someone you knew. It's also important to not invalidate their feelings. All responses to this situation are correct responses by them. Also, don't ask why questions. When you ask why questions, it really creates an environment of victim blaming. So if you're asking like, oh, why were you walking that way that night? Or why were you wearing that, that outfit? It really implies that that person brought it on themselves by doing something. It's also important to avoid confronting the abuser or perpetrator. It can create a really unsafe situation for yourself and even for the victim. It's also important to avoid telling their story without permission. The survivor needs to have all of the agency in this situation to make decisions about their own health, their own safety, and their own story. Also, don't ask for a lot of details. It's not your place. They will share with you what they feel comfortable and what they trust sharing with you. And don't make decisions for them. Again, they need to be making all of the decisions. They need to have all the agency so that they can get the help that is best for them. And finally, don't judge their decisions. I assure you that in these situations, every decision that a survivor makes is a decision that they feel they have to make. So it's really, really important to support them in whatever they decide and not tell them how to respond.
So I'm just going to talk about some options for survivors. It's really important, I think, that you leave this this night knowing that we always believe survivors and that we always give them full agency, like Jessica mentioned, and we let them lead. We are here as advocates to listen. You are here as friends to listen and to let a friend, let a loved one, let whomever know that you're there to support and to listen, not to make the decisions and call the shots and give your best advice and push them to make the choice that you think is right for you. Because at the end of the day, it was not your experience, it's the survivor's experience, and they get to decide what is best for them, not you. So these are some options for reporting and not reporting. So by not reporting, a survivor can tell friends and family. If that is as far as they want to go, that's fine. They can also choose to seek medical care at maybe a clinic like Planned Parenthood. Maybe they do not want to do a sexual assault forensic exam. A lot of times, I mean, these are really, sexual assault forensic exams are very invasive. They're collecting DNA and evidence to use for trial or prosecution against the person that has harmed them. And that might not be the right journey or the right choice for the survivor. So maybe they want to go to Planned Parenthood and say something like, I had rough, unprotected sex and like to be medically checked out, because maybe they want to be screened for things like sexually transmitted infections or pregnancy test, or perhaps if they want to get things like antibiotics or Plan B or things like that. That is what they want to do, support them. Maybe you can help them coordinate that visit if that is their choice. You can also link them to places like YWCA, where we provide crisis counseling and then ongoing therapy services as well. With reporting, an initial report can be made to law enforcement. And I'm sure you are all aware of Valley Medical Center. So Valley Medical Center, up until recently, was the only place in our county that you were able to go in after having had a sexual assault. VMC, Valley Medical Center, was the only place that you could go to have a sexual assault forensic exam. They have like a special sexual assault response team that includes nurses that are able to conduct this whole forensic exam. These forensic exams are completely free of charge, and they're at no cost to the survivor. Also, YWCA advocates, it is a survivor's right to have an advocate present to just hold their hand, walk them through the steps, inform them of their options, let them know that they are there for them, let them know what kind of services we provide at our organization. It's completely free and well within their right to do that. If that is something that the survivor wants to do, 72 hours to 96 hours after the assault is when it's best to go to Valley Medical Center, or sooner. And I went kind of through what the START exam is already. Again, medical care, this forensic exam, discussing legal options, civil remedies or restraining orders. Those are all options for survivors. Again, YWCA services, we do actually have a legal advocacy department within our agency that can help to ensure that the survivor is able to get a restraining order or press charges if that is what they want to do. I mentioned that we have that counseling, we have support groups, and then of course our 24-hour crisis support line.
Okay, so when you are supporting a survivor, it's also important to take care of yourself. It can be stressful to support a survivor, but it's also and it's important to make sure that you are not draining yourself. So take care of yourself. Remember that your job isn't to rescue and fix. You're never going to undo an action or undo a situation for the survivor. So don't put that on yourself. And attend to your own physical and emotional needs. Make sure that you are getting the help that you need, whether it's talking to a support line, seeking out resources for yourself, talking to other friends or family members. And that's all really, really important.
So this is just kind of a review of the objectives that we went over today. Today, we identified key facts and realities about sexual violence. We differentiated between what is and isn't consent. We identified myths and facts surrounding consent and recognized how to help a friend and what not to do. This was kind of just like an abbreviated presentation on a really large issue that I really encourage you all to explore, to check out our website, to volunteer if you can, and to really stay informed and connected. Follow sexual assault advocacy groups on Instagram or Facebook. There's some really great organizations out there doing this really incredible work. And then above all, Jessica, I'll leave this last slide to you.
Okay. If you or anyone you know is experiencing violence, you can call the YWCA of Silicon Valley 24/7, 365 days a year, or 366 if it's a leap year. You can call our crisis line at 1-800-572-2782, or you can visit our website at ywca-sv.org. Does anybody have any questions?
We finished with a couple minutes, so if there are any questions at all, please feel free to ask. I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Folks, as always, we'd like at least a couple questions from the class. Don't be so shy. I know Vanessa and Jessica covered a lot, but I know you might have some questions that are lingering, things that you're wondering. Feel free to ask those questions in the chat. And remember to send that question directly to either Vanessa or Jessica.
Did anyone think of any creative ways to ask for consent? Okay, I did receive an anonymous question. So thank you for this helpful presentation. This is a bit of a broader question. This is related to dress codes in schools. Typically, they aim to punish girls for distracting others with how they choose to dress. Is the implementation of dress code contributing to rape culture in a way? That's a great question. I would say yes, absolutely. I think that dress codes, especially like in high school, middle school, and even actually elementary school, actually anywhere really, definitely do punish and contribute to this rape culture. Absolutely. Because what we're saying is that women or people that or people that identify as women, that they should be ashamed of their bodies and ashamed of the way that they're dressing, and that they aren't humans. And we're kind of teaching and like enabling this culture of not, what am I trying to say here? We're creating this culture where we're saying, we're saying don't dress that way instead of don't rape. And so absolutely, great question. We are definitely upholding rape culture, I think, when we are being so hardcore about these dress codes. So I'm seeing this question also in the chat, and Jessica, I'm not sure if you would like to answer that one. Okay, so This is kind of talking about creating awkward situations that maybe like friends or parents can make inappropriate or sexist jokes or comments. How do you not make it awkward and still be able to have encounters with this person? I think that it's really important to draw boundaries and just, not let the person know that you're not okay with that. It makes you uncomfortable. Let them know about how these kind of comments are further perpetuating rape culture and sexual violence and really aren't helping to fight against and eliminate gender-based violence and sexual violence in general. Letting them, I think that sometimes people think that, it's just in good fun, I'm just poking fun, but I don't think that they're aware of the fact that it's offensive. So I think that if you feel inclined to do so, I think maybe just like educating that person and encouraging them to explore that further and why that has, ask them, why does that have to be your joke? Why do you have to use sex or bodies and violence as like your preferred method of comedy? Like, why can't you talk about something else? Kind of like piquing that interest and like asking like why. And then, but most importantly, just drawing that boundary. That way they know, like, it's not cool with me if you are going to be talking like that.
Another thing with the joke side of that is one of my favorite responses to that when someone makes an offensive joke to me, expecting me to laugh. I'll always be like, I don't get it. Why is that funny? Because that sort of forces the person who's making the joke to confront the fact that they're making a joke at the expense of someone who's been sexually assaulted or at the expense of someone who is of another race. So that sort of leads them on their own journey of self-discovery.
Discovery, yeah.
Okay, so I got a question anonymously that says, how can we avoid sex or rape drugs when in a public setting or a party setting? Oh, okay. So one of the pieces of advice that we give with this one is to make sure you're with people you trust. And typically when we talk about date rape drugs, it's in a drink. So covering your drink or not leaving it unattended. But generally trying to be in environments where you feel safe, surrounded by people you trust. Is one of the best ways because that can help to keep you safe. Vanessa, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just just echoing what Jessica said, just being cautious, being safe, looking out for the people that you're with and making sure that you all are looking out for each other. Making sure that you're developing like kind of like a plan, like, hey, we're gonna all like leave at 11, right? And we're all gonna get home this way, and we're all going to do this X, Y, and Z afterwards. And just, I think, staying together. Unfortunately, it is a reality that those plans do have to be made in some instances. But I think that the bigger message is that we need to have more conversations about not using roofies and being able to drink without fear of being raped after or assaulted after. I think that bringing those conversations to light and having those conversations with your friends and your family and your peers, your colleagues, I think that's really important work that needs to be done because we really need to like dismantle that. We shouldn't have to worry about covering our drinks. We should be able to put our drink down for a second, run to the bathroom and come back without fear of having to like say like, oh, is this good still? Did someone slip something in it? That's scary and that's violent, and we shouldn't have to live that way.
Yeah. One last thing I want to add to that. Follow your instincts. And really, and this is really important, don't be afraid to be rude. If someone's offering you a drink that you don't want or that you don't know where it came from, maybe it's someone you don't know, don't be afraid to say no.
Absolutely. I completely agree with Jessica. That is so key. You don't owe that to anybody. You don't owe that to anybody. You are allowed to say no thanks. No, I'm good. Or just not drink it. Just leave it. You definitely don't have to drink anything or do anything or participate in any kind of like drug or alcohol that you don't want to do. Definitely trust your instincts.
Okay, and then we got another question in the chat. How do we define mental abuse in relationships or mentally abusive relationships? And how do you know if you are in one of them?
I think that abusive relationships are always about power and control dynamics. I think that when we think about power and control and those kind of dynamics, thinking about kind of like this cycle of like, everything's really good and beautiful and great, hearts and flowers, things are going really well with your partner. Then maybe there's something that happens. Maybe you get into like a small disagreement and it kind of like starts becoming a bigger thing. And then there's just like this explosion where the person acts out. Maybe it's mental or physical, verbal abuse. And then, it goes back to that hearts and flowers stage where everything's back to normal. They apologize. I'm really sorry. I'll make it up to you. I'll never do that to you again. And then that kind of cycle just keeps going and kind of like spinning. And that's definitely one of the signs of a mental abuse relationship. I think that you really need to be critical of the fact that relationships are supposed to feel safe. They're supposed to be a safe space. They're supposed to be something that brings you joy and happiness and not fear and worry. I think it's also really important to note that not every single relationship is perfect. Of course, people have disagreements, but it's thinking about how those disagreements manifest. Is it healthy the way in which the disagreements come to be? Or is there lots of like cursing and explosions and making you feel stupid? Or are there threats? Is there coercion happening? It's kind of just defining those things. And what I'd really like to do is encourage you all, if you find that you or a friend are in a relationship where you're not feeling safe, to call our support line. Because our advocates can walk you through the specifics of your personal relationship and help you define whether or not that is abusive or not, and what you can do to kind of safety plan around that.
And then we got another question in the chat. What should I do if I'm in a situation where the perpetrator refuses to leave me alone despite me not giving them consent? Yeah, Vanessa.
I feel like I would need like some more specifics about that, but anytime that you are being forced into something and you have like an option to get out of there, you need to take that option and leave immediately and report it. Again, I don't really know what the specifics are to this situation. But if you feel like maybe calling law enforcement is something that you're comfortable with, you can call law enforcement. If you feel like, you are in a space, maybe you're at a party or something and someone won't leave you alone and you're not feeling safe, then maybe that means you're taking an Uber home or telling your friends, let's go, or having a parent come and pick you up or something like that. If it's maybe like sexual advances at work, then maybe that looks like reporting that to HR, talking to your supervisor about that, talking to your supervisor's supervisor about that if it is your supervisor. It really kind of depends on what the instance is. And once again, if you feel like you're not really sure, then trust your gut, go with your instinct, and do what you need to do to make you feel safe.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? These were all great questions. Thank you all for all these excellent questions.
I think that's going to conclude it for tonight. Thank
All
you
right.
so much, Vanessa and Jessica. You know, we can give you a virtual round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. It means so much that you all will come tonight and present to the class. We're very thankful. Very, very thankful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight and for having us here. We are so we're really looking forward to this and really thrilled to be here and be part of the De Anza community. I know, especially I was, since I love De Anza so much. But please feel free to look us up, YWCA-SV, like SiliconValley.org, for more information on how you can help the survivor or how you can help yourself if you do need that. Everyone deserves to be happy, everyone deserves to be healthy, and everyone deserves to be safe. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you.